All right, everybody, I think that the rumor mill is confirming what we all kind of believed, that Georgia's biggest weakness is on that defensive line and in the edge rusher group. Dean asked Matt and I on a riding home that I'm not 100% sure has dropped yet or not, but he asked us, where's Georgia need to look in the transfer portal to improve its roster? Matt got to go first. He talked about the defensive front. He talked about some other positions. My answer was there's no other place to look. I think Georgia, in terms of depth, is fine at all positions except for that defensive line room and the edge rushers. It's not a knock. I'm not saying these are bad football players for Georgia, but I think when you pick apart Georgia's roster and I pick apart what I've seen and what I know and what I watched at UGA, I don't know if there's a star on Georgia's defensive line. I don't know if there's a star in the edge rusher room. What happens if one or two of these guys gets hurt? Are they going to be relying on freshmen? Well, there are rumors that Georgia's after a couple of different players in the portal. Let's get into that. Ryan Curley from Dawg Post talking about the Dawgs and the transfer portal. Not something you talk about as much as maybe some other programs. When we talk about the transfer portal, usually it's not Georgia. We know that Georgia wasn't afraid to go out and get some safeties, go out and get some wide receivers. So Georgia goes and dips into the transfer portal. There's two guys that I'm seeing on social media that the Dawgs are rumored to kind of be after right now and wanting to add to the roster. One of those guys being a 6'5", 295-pound defensive lineman from the Miami Hurricanes, Joshua Horton. There is a report that he is visiting Athens this weekend, so he will be in town this weekend. I'll be out of town this weekend, but he is on a visit. And look, Georgia lost a couple of interior defensive linemen to the draft this season. Nazir Stackhouse, who I've been seeing around Athens a lot, getting his workouts in. Warren Brinson, another guy. And it's a spot where, I think Jordan Hall and Christian Miller are kind of your obvious two starters, but they want more depth. What if one of them gets hurt? Well, then they've got Ogboko, they've got Xavier McLeod, they've got guys, but I don't know if there's a lot of excitement with those guys, or maybe the expectations with those players aren't quite as high. But going after a guy that is of that size, of that stature, and would have 3 years of eligibility remaining after he transfers, there's a lot to like about that with Horton out of Miami. So the thing about Georgia's defensive line is there's just a lot of unproven, right? Out of everybody, the most experienced player, and this coincides with the age as well, Christian Miller, been around for a few years, this heading into year 4. He's played the most, and I think he's a guy that could be really good for Georgia. He didn't get as many reps this spring dealing with an injury, but he is a starter for Georgia for sure to me on this defensive line. Jordan Hall is a big-time prospect. He's a bona fide 5-star prospect who has dealt with injuries and has been a little bit behind on the depth chart, so he hasn't played. Justin Green, Ogboko, Joseph Jonah-Ajayi, these guys are legitimate prospects when you look at them, just haven't played a lot. So there is an unknown factor on Georgia's defensive line. Horton would be another body, another guy that can sub, another guy that can compete for snaps. But talent is not the issue, right? Like in terms of at least what they were ranked in high school, Georgia has really talented guys. In this particular class, they went and they got Elijah Griffin, who has, he's a bona fide 5-star. He was a top 5 prospect in high school in the 2025 recruiting class. He's been compared to Jalen Carter. There's been a lot of buzz around Elijah Griffin. Personally, I haven't seen anything that has told me that yet. I'm not knocking Elijah Griffin, but I went and watched him play once in high school, so it's just the one time. Saw him compared to some other guys in practice, saw what he did at G-Day, and to me it hasn't screamed Jalen Carter yet. There's certainly talent there, and you can see that, but Jalen Carter is a generational defensive tackle. Right? There aren't a lot of Jalen Carters out there in football in general, not just in college football, but in pro football as well. This Horton guy would add depth at a place where they've had injuries. Miller dealing with one, Jordan Hall has dealt with them, and a lack of experience. And there are freshmen like Darren Ikenagbong and Isaiah Gibson that might play this season as freshmen as defensive ends. Kirby does not want to play freshmen as much as possible. They play out of necessity. That's where you saw KJ Bolden. You see Malachi Starks in the past, Nate Frazier. They've played out of necessity. There's another guy that they are rumored to be going after in the transfer portal, and this one is an edge rusher. And I believe Georgia and Ohio State are kind of the two teams to watch for on this from what I've read. Bo Atkinson, an edge rusher out of North Carolina. Pretty good stature. And then you look at the production in 2 years at North Carolina, he's got 11 sacks, so he's a guy who has gotten in the backfield, has proven himself there. When you look at that position group for Georgia, which kind of coincides with the defensive line a little bit, Gabe Harris is probably your number one, right? And he's entering year 3 in the program. He's the oldest edge rusher Georgia has. And he's entering year 3. Doesn't have a ton of experience. Had a couple sacks last season. Got in the backfield when he got opportunities. But Georgia is thinner at that spot. And he was limited this spring. He didn't play at G-Day. So Quintavious Johnson, a guy that's entering year 2, played a lot. Kirby told us he's not where he needs to be. Chris Jones entering year 2 and who didn't play last year. So this would be a redshirt freshman. He was playing outside linebacker at G-Day. They were rolling with the ones. So that is a very, very inexperienced spot for Georgia. And that's why, they're rumored to be going after a guy like Bo Atkinson, who's been playing, and it would not be new to college football the way that Quintavious Johnson got some snaps last year, but that Johnson and Chris Jones would be. And then, I'm going to talk about the inside linebackers a little bit in a video here in the next couple days, but Chris Cole is kind of a hybrid, right? Chris Cole, he was a true freshman last year. He got some playing time. He looked really good, honestly, in the playing time that he did get. I think he's going to be a guy where they call upon him to play that outside linebacker position too because of the versatility. But look, Georgia lost Michael Williams, lost Jalen Walker, Chaz Chambliss, the defensive tackles I mentioned earlier, Damon Wilson in the transfer portal. A ton of production, a ton of experience, and a ton of talent left Georgia in a very, very critical spot, especially in the SEC where games are won in the trenches in the SEC. And Georgia's won the trenches a lot over the last few years. They just don't have... You just don't look at it and say, I know that's going to be good. I can't sit here and tell you and look at Georgia's edge rushers, look at Georgia's defensive line, and sit here and definitively tell you, I think that's going to be a really good spot for Georgia. To me, that's where the most mystery is on this football team. I know that people say the running back position is possibly where the most mystery is, but I think there's plenty of talent. Now, at running back. That doesn't mean that I don't think that there's plenty of talent in the defensive line, but running back's not as difficult to adapt to, right? And we saw Frazier succeed as a freshman. I think Bowens looks good. They've got bodies there, right? They can afford to have Branson Robinson transfer out. They couldn't really afford to have Damon Wilson transfer to Missouri. He was going to be a bona fide dude for them this season and potentially, outside of the inside linebackers, their best front seven player and probably their best edge rusher. That really hurt the Dawgs. And going after an Atkinson, going after a Horton, I don't know if either of them end up picking Georgia. But it's not surprising. And to me, it just kind of confirms I'm not seeing them go after backs or quarterbacks or offensive linemen. The rumors I'm seeing are guys on the front seven. And that really coincides with what Matt and I were talking about in another video on a riding home where, look, where does Georgia need to go after? They're going after what we said, which is the defensive line and the edge rushers. Is that Georgia's weakest position? It's kind of looking like it. It could prove us wrong. They've got 5-star guys on it. I'm not saying it's going to be bad. It's just the one I know the least about, and that's kind of what I think. Links below. Appreciate you watching, and feedback is always welcome. Thank you.